Chosen one, stop for a moment and really listen carefully, because what I'm about to say is not something you hear every day, and it's definitely not something meant for everyone. This message has a way of finding very specific people, especially those who have been feeling like something in their life doesn't quite make sense. Like things have been unfolding in a way that feels different from everyone around them, even if they can't fully explain why. If that's you, then you already know this feeling didn't just appear out of nowhere. For a long time now, something has felt off, not in a chaotic or obvious way, but in a deeper and more subtle way, like you've been moving through life slightly out of sync with the people around you. You've probably tried to ignore it, tried to adapt, tried to convince yourself that maybe you just needed to try harder, fit in more, or become more like everyone else. But no matter how much you adjusted, something never fully clicked, and that's because it was never supposed to. You were never designed to move the way they move, and you were never meant to think the way they think. Deep down, even before you had the words to describe it, you could feel that difference. It showed up in small moments at first, moments where you would observe people, listen to conversations, and feel like you were watching something instead of fully being part of it. It was like you were present, but not completely involved, like you could see patterns and behaviors that others didn't even seem to notice. At the time, you may have thought this was normal, like everyone experienced the world this way. But over time, you started to realize that wasn't true. That realization didn't come all at once. It came through experiences, through situations where things didn't go the way they were supposed to, at least not the way they usually do for other people. Relationships didn't last the way you expected. Friendships faded without clear reasons, and opportunities that looked perfect on the surface somehow never fully aligned for you. At first, that probably felt frustrating, maybe even confusing. You may have blamed yourself at times, thinking that you were doing something wrong, or that there was something you needed to fix about yourself. You may have believed that if you just adjusted a little more, tried a little harder, or became a little different, things would finally fall into place the way they seemed to for everyone else. But no matter how much you analyzed it or tried to change your approach, the same pattern kept repeating. Things would enter your life, stay just long enough to teach you something, and then leave. And over time, that pattern created a very specific kind of feeling, not just loneliness, but a deeper sense of isolation, the kind that doesn't depend on whether you're physically alone or surrounded by people. You could be in a room full of others, and still feel like no one fully understood how you think or how you see things. Conversations often felt surface level, connections felt temporary, and there was always this sense that something was missing. Eventually, you stopped trying as hard to force those connections. Not because you gave up, but because something inside you started to recognize that forcing alignment where there was none was exhausting. You began pulling back, maybe without even realizing it at first. You became more observant, more selective, and more aware of how certain interactions affected you. And that's when everything started to shift. Because what looked like isolation on the surface was actually something much more intentional happening underneath. You were being separated, not randomly, not unfairly, but with a level of precision that you couldn't see at the time. I know that might be difficult to accept, because when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel intentional. It feels like loss, like things not working out, like being misunderstood or even left behind. But what if that's not what it actually was? What if what you experienced wasn't rejection, but redirection? What if what left your life wasn't taken from you, but removed for you? Because not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things leave because they cannot continue with who you are becoming. And that brings us to something very important that you need to understand. You are not just becoming this version of yourself right now. You have been becoming this version of yourself for a long time, long before you were consciously aware of it. Every situation you went through was shaping something inside you. Not on the surface, but at a much deeper level. A level that doesn't develop through comfort or ease, but through contrast, through being placed in situations that don't fully match you, so that you can recognize what actually does. That kind of development requires distance, because you cannot clearly see something if you are completely immersed in it. You have to step back, observe, and detach in order to understand it. And that is exactly what your life has been guiding you to do, even when you didn't understand it. Even when you resisted it, and even when you wished things would just feel normal. But your version of normal was never meant to look like theirs. And once you begin to truly understand that, everything starts to change. You stop comparing your path to theirs, and you stop measuring your life using standards that were never meant for you in the first place. That releases a huge amount of pressure, the pressure to fit in, to keep up, or to constantly explain yourself. And when that pressure begins to fall away, something else starts to form in its place. Clarity. Not perfect clarity all at once, but a growing sense of understanding. You begin to see why certain things didn't work, why certain people couldn't stay, and why certain paths never felt right, no matter how much. And instead of feeling confused by it, you begin to feel aligned with it. That alignment changes how you move forward, because now instead of trying to make things fit, you start recognizing what naturally aligns with you. Your decisions become quieter, more intentional, and less reactive, but at the same time, much more powerful, because now you are not acting based on pressure or expectation, you are acting based on awareness. And that awareness is something that had to be developed over time. It didn't just appear, it was built through everything you experienced, through the distance, the silence, and the separation that once felt uncomfortable but were actually necessary. Because without those moments, you would not have been able to see what you now see or understand what you now understand. And this is where everything begins to shift even more. Because what was built inside you during those periods of isolation is not just awareness, it is something deeper, something that explains why you process things differently, now why you recover differently, and why no matter what you go through, you don't come out of it the same way most people do. That is what we are going to uncover next, because once you understand what was actually developed inside you, your entire past will start to make sense in a way it never has before. And more importantly, you will start to understand what that means for everything that is about to happen in your future. Chosen one, now that you've started to recognize that what you went through was not random, we need to go deeper. Because simply knowing that you were separate, the real question is why your life followed this pattern, why things kept repeating in different forms, and why no matter how much you tried to change the outcome, the same type of situations kept appearing again and again. If you look back carefully, you'll notice something very important. The details changed, the people changed, the environments changed, but the emotional experience, the lesson underneath it, and the way it pushed you to grow remained the same. That is not coincidence, that is structure, and structure means intention. Your life was not just a series of random events. It was a sequence designed to develop something inside you that cannot be built through comfort or easy situations. And the only way that kind of development happens is through pressure. Not one moment of pressure, but repeated pressure. Situations that test you in similar ways until your response begins to change. At first, you reacted like anyone else would. You took things personally. You questioned yourself. You tried to fix what you thought was wrong. But over time, something shifted. Instead of reacting the same way, you started observing. You started asking different questions. That shift from reacting to observing is where your development really began. Because most people go through life adapting by blending in with their environment. But you adapted by understanding it. And that created a completely different outcome. Instead of becoming shaped by the situations you experienced, you started seeing through them. You began to recognize behavior patterns in people, emotional cycles in yourself, and repeated dynamics that no longer felt random once you noticed them enough times. Think about those moments where you felt misunderstood, or where you gave more than you received. At the time, it felt personal, like something specific to that situation. But looking back now, you can see that it was a pattern that showed up in different forms until you finally saw it clearly. You were being shown how people operate, how energy moves between individuals, and where you were overextending yourself. You were also being shown your own tendencies, your own habits, and the areas where you needed to grow. This process is not comfortable, because it forces you to confront things you would normally ignore. But it is necessary because you cannot change what you do not see, and your life made sure you saw everything. Not all at once, but gradually, layer by layer, until your awareness increased to the point where you could no longer ignore what was happening. Once that awareness reached a certain level, your responses naturally started to change. You began pulling back sooner, noticing red flags earlier, and making decisions with more clarity. This is what real growth looks like. It is not loud, and it is not always visible from the outside, but internally it changes everything. It restructures how you think, how you feel, and how you move. And it happens through repetition, through being placed in similar situations until you respond differently. Once your response changes, the pattern no longer needs to repeat. That is why certain things in your life suddenly ended. Not because you failed, but because you completed the lesson. There is also something else that developed during this process that you need to understand. It is the difference between awareness. Awareness allows you to notice what is happening, but discernment allows you to decide what to do with that information. It allows you to recognize what aligns with you and what does not, without needing anyone else to confirm it for you. And once you develop discernment, you stop wasting energy. You stop investing in situations that are not meant for you, and you stop chasing outcomes that don't align with your path. This is why your life feels different. Now you are no longer moving blindly or reacting automatically. You are moving with intention, even if it feels quieter or slower. And that quiet shift is powerful because it means your decisions are now based on clarity instead of pressure. Most people never reach that point because they are constantly influenced by what is happening around them. But you were pulled out of that long enough to develop your own internal direction. The reason this process took time is because it cannot be rushed. It has to be experienced fully in order to become part of you. If it happens too quickly, it stays on the surface and fades. But when it is built slowly, through real experiences, it becomes permanent. That is what happened to you. You didn't just learn these lessons, you became them. They are now part of how you think and how you move, whether you realize it or not. Now everything from part 1 starts to make more sense. The isolation you experienced was not just about people leaving. It was about creating the space necessary for this level of awareness and discernment to develop. You needed distance from constant input so you could see clearly. You needed silence so you could hear your own thoughts without interference. And you needed separation so you could recognize patterns without being fully absorbed in them. What felt like being left alone was actually being given the exact environment required for your growth. And now that growth has reached a point where it is stable, your reality is starting to reflect that. This is why your tolerance has changed, your standards have shifted, and certain things no longer feel acceptable. You are not being difficult or overly selective. You are operating from alignment, and alignment naturally filters out what does not match. As you move forward, there may be moments where you question yourself. You may wonder if you were too distant, too quiet, or too selective. But those decisions came from the level of awareness you had developed, and that awareness was accurate. Doubting it now would only pull you back into patterns you have already outgrown. Trust what you see, trust what you feel, and trust what you have learned, because it was built through real experience. Not guesswork, and now you are ready for the next level of understanding. Because everything we've talked about so far explains how you became aware and how you developed discernment, but it does not yet explain why you handle pressure differently. Now it does not explain why you recover faster, why you don't stay stuck in the same emotional cycles, and why difficult situations seem to strengthen you instead of breaking you. That is something deeper, something that goes beyond awareness and beyond understanding. It is something that was built through everything you went through, and it is the reason your life is about to shift in ways you didn't expect. In the next part, we're going to break that down completely, because once you understand it, you will see your entire past differently, and you will finally understand what was actually being built inside you this whole time. Chosen one. Now we're about to step into the part that explains everything, and I need you to stay focused, because what I'm about to describe is the reason your life has unfolded the way it has. And it's also the reason why no matter what you've been through, you didn't break the way you were supposed to. Up to this point, we've talked about your isolation, your awareness, and your ability to recognize patterns. But none of that fully explains the most important question, which is this: why do you recover differently? Why do you go through things that would completely derail other people, and yet somehow you come out of it clearer, stronger, and more stable than before? Because that is not normal. Most people, when they experience pressure, absorb it. They take in the stress, the negativity, the confusion, and it begins to shape them from the inside. It affects their thinking, their emotions, and eventually their behavior. Over time, that pressure accumulates, and it changes who they are. But that's not what happens to you. Something else happens. And you may not have even realized it consciously, but if you look closely at your own life, you'll start to see the pattern. Every time you go through something difficult, you don't just endure it, you process it in a completely different way. You take the experience, and instead of letting it define you, you turn it into understanding. You turn it into clarity. You turn it into something that actually strengthens you, instead of weakening you. That process has a name, and once you understand it, everything about your past will make sense. It's called internal transmutation. Let me explain what that means, because this is where everything shifts. Transmutation is not the same as resisting something, and it's not the same as avoiding it. Most people try to protect themselves from negativity by blocking it or running away from it, but that only delays the impact. The energy is still there, and eventually it finds a way to affect them. But transmutation is different. Transmutation means you take what enters your life, no matter what it is, pressure, negativity, conflict, pain, and you process it in a way that changes its effect on you. Instead of allowing it to become something destructive inside you, you convert it into something useful. That is why you don't carry things the same way others do. That is why you don't stay stuck in the same emotional cycles. That is why even after difficult experiences, you eventually reach a point where you understand more than you did before. You are not just experiencing life, you are transforming it as it happens. And here is where this becomes even more important. This is not something you learned intentionally. No one sat down and taught you how to do this. You developed it through experience, through being placed in situations that forced you to figure out how to process things differently, because reacting the same way over and over again wasn't working. So you adapted, but you didn't adapt by shutting down. You adapted by upgrading how you process. And that created something rare, because most people either absorb negativity or they project it. They take in what they experience and either let it damage them internally or pass it on to others. That's the cycle most people stay trapped in. But you broke that cycle. You don't absorb it the same way, and you don't pass it on the same way. You convert it. That is why your energy feels different. That is why people notice something about you that they can't fully explain. And that is also why your life has not followed a predictable path. Because once someone develops the ability to transmute their experiences, they are no longer controlled by them. They are shaped by them, but not limited by them. Now here is something that most people are not aware of. When someone operates like this consistently, it changes how they interact with everything around them. Situations that would normally escalate begin to stabilize. Conflicts that would normally create chaos begin to lose intensity. And people who are used to predictable reactions start to feel uncertain, because they cannot get the response they expect. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. Moments where someone expected you to react emotionally, but you didn't. Situations where something should have affected you more, but it didn't. Times where you stayed calm, not because you were forcing it, but because something inside you had already processed the situation before you even responded. That is transmutation in action. It happens faster now than it used to. At first, it may have taken you a long time to process things, days, weeks, even longer. But now the time it takes has shortened. You still feel things, you still experience them, but you move through them faster. That is growth, and that is mastery beginning to form. No, here is where things become even more interesting. Because once this ability reaches a certain level, it doesn't just affect how you handle situations. It affects how situations interact with you. Think about that carefully. It's not just that you respond differently. It's that the same situations begin to behave differently around you, because they are no longer producing the same outcome. And when outcomes change, patterns break. That is why your life has started to feel less predictable. That is why things don't impact you the same way they used to. And that is also why certain people have become uncomfortable around you, because they are used to interacting with a version of you that no longer exists. Now here is something deeper that you need to understand. When you develop internal transmutation, you become very difficult to influence in negative ways. Not because you are closed off, but because you process things before they can take root. That means external pressure loses its ability to control your internal state. And once that happens, you step into a completely different level of independence. You are no longer reacting to life, you are interacting with it. And there is a big difference. Now here is where this connects to everything we talked about before. Your isolation was necessary because this ability cannot develop in constant noise. You needed space to process. You needed time to understand. You needed distance to observe. Without those conditions, you would have continued reacting the same way as everyone else. But because you were removed from that environment, you developed something different. Something that most people never even realize exists. And now that it exists within you, everything begins to change. Your decisions change. Your relationships change. Your direction changes. Because now, you are not just moving based on what happens. You are shaping what happens by how you process it. That is power. But it is not loud power. It is not obvious power. It is internal. And because it is internal, it is stable. Now here is the part that you need to really pay attention to. Because this is where everything starts to connect to your future. The more you use this ability, the stronger it becomes. Every experience you go through strengthens it. Every situation you process expands it. And over time, it becomes your default way of operating. You don't have to think about it anymore. It just happens. And when it reaches that point, you become someone who cannot be easily shaken. Someone who cannot be easily influenced. Someone who does not collapse under pressure. And that changes your trajectory completely. Because once you reach that level, life begins to respond differently to you. And that is exactly what is starting to happen now. In the next part, we are going to break down how this ability is already showing up in your life, in ways you may not have fully recognized, and what it means for what is coming next. Because the signs are already there, you just need to see them clearly. Chosen one. Now that you understand what has been developing inside you, the next step is recognizing how it is already showing up in your life. Because this is where everything becomes real. It's one thing to hear about an ability or a process, but it's another thing to actually see the evidence of it in your own experience. And if you've been paying attention, the signs have already been there. The first sign is that you recover faster than you used to. Think about how you handled difficult situations in the past compared to now. There was a time when something could affect you for weeks, maybe even months, where you would replay it in your mind, question everything, and feel stuck in that emotional state. But now something different happens. You still feel it, you still process it, but you don't stay there as long. You move through it faster, almost like something inside you is working in the background, breaking it down and clearing it out. That is not you becoming numb, and it's not you avoiding your emotions. It is you processing them more efficiently. The second sign is that situations don't escalate around you the way they used to. You may have noticed that conflicts either resolve quicker or don't fully develop at all. Things that should turn into bigger problems somehow lose momentum. People who might normally create drama or tension either back off or their energy doesn't affect you the same way. It's not because the world suddenly became peaceful. It's because your way of interacting with it has changed, and that changes the outcome. The third sign is that you've become more selective without forcing it. You're not trying to cut people off or isolate yourself, but you naturally feel less drawn to certain conversations, certain environments, and certain dynamics. Things that once felt normal now feel draining or unnecessary. And instead of forcing yourself to stay engaged, you simply step back. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. That clarity is coming from your discernment, and it is guiding you toward what actually aligns with you. The fourth sign is that people react to you differently, even if they can't explain why. Some people feel comfortable around you because your presence feels stable. Others feel uneasy because they can't predict you the way they used to. You're not reacting in ways they expect, and that disrupts the patterns they are used to. This doesn't mean you've changed in a negative way. It means you've become less predictable, and unpredictability removes control. The fifth sign is something more internal, and it's very important. You've developed a quiet sense of certainty, not loud confidence. Not the kind that needs to be shown or proven, but a calm, steady knowing. Even when things are unclear on the outside, there is something inside you that feels grounded. You don't panic the way you used to. You don't feel the need to rush decisions or chase outcomes. You allow things to unfold while still staying aware. That balance is something most people struggle to find, but you've started to develop it naturally. Now, when you put all of these signs together, a pattern becomes clear. You are not operating the same way you used to, and because of that, your life cannot continue unfolding the same way it did before. Something has shifted at a fundamental level, and once that shift happens, everything else begins to adjust around it. This is why you may have been feeling like something is about to change. That feeling is not random. And it's not just wishful thinking. It's awareness picking up on movement before it becomes visible. When your internal state reaches a certain level of clarity, you begin to sense changes before they fully arrive. You may not know exactly what is coming, but you can feel that something is different. And you're right, because you are no longer in a phase of preparation. You are entering a phase of alignment. And alignment brings movement. This is where opportunities begin to appear more naturally. Not forced, not chased, but aligned. Things start to connect in ways that feel almost effortless compared to before. Situations begin to make sense without needing to be overanalyzed, and people who resonate with your current state begin to show up in your life. But here is something very important that you need to remember, as this begins to happen. Do not go back to old patterns just because they feel familiar. Do not lower your awareness just to make others comfortable. And do not ignore what you feel just because you cannot logically explain it yet. Because everything that is coming next is going to require you to trust what you have developed. Your awareness, your discernment, and your ability to process what you experience without losing yourself in it. This next phase is not about learning something new. It is about using what you already have. And that is a very different kind of growth. Because now, instead of being shaped by your experiences, you are shaping how those experiences affect you. That means you are no longer at the mercy of what happens. You are participating in how it unfolds. Now here is where this becomes even more real. As you move forward, you may notice that certain things begin to accelerate. Areas of your life that felt slow or stagnant may suddenly start moving. Opportunities that once felt out of reach may become accessible. And connections that align with you may form more quickly than expected. This is not because you suddenly became lucky. It is because you became aligned. And alignment removes resistance. When resistance is removed, movement becomes natural. But with that movement comes responsibility. Because now, your choices matter even more. The way you respond matters even more. And the direction you choose to move in will determine what continues to align with you. This is why it is so important to stay grounded in what you have developed. Because the same ability that helped you navigate difficult situations is now going to help you navigate opportunities. And if you use it correctly, everything that comes into your life will build on itself instead of falling apart. Chosen one, you are not at the beginning anymore. You are in the transition between who you were and who you are becoming. And that transition is where everything starts to come together. In the next part, we are going to bring all of this into one clear understanding. Because once you see the full picture, you will realize that nothing in your life was ever out of place. And more importantly, you will understand exactly what this means for where you are going next. Chosen one. Now everything comes together, and I need you to really take a moment to let this sink in. Because what you've just understood is not small, and it's not something that applies to everyone. This entire process, the isolation, the repeated patterns, the pressure, the awareness, the discernment, and the ability you developed to process things differently, all of it was connected. None of it was random. None of it was wasted, and none of it happened without purpose. For a long time, it probably felt like you were going through things that didn't make sense, like you were being tested in ways that others around you weren't. You may have questioned why things were harder, why things didn't last, or why your path seemed so different. But now you can start to see that it wasn't about things being harder. It was about things being more. It was about you being placed in situations that would build something inside you that cannot be built any other way. And the truth is, most people never reach this level of understanding. Not because they can't, but because they don't go through the same process, or they resist it when they do. But you didn't. Even when you didn't fully understand what was happening, you kept going. You kept processing. You kept adapting. And because of that, you are no longer reacting to life the same way. You are no longer defined by what happens to you. You are no longer moving blindly from one situation to the next. You are aware. You are discerning. And most importantly, you are in control of how you process what enters your life. That changes everything. Because once you reach this point, your life cannot continue unfolding. The patterns that once repeated begin to break. The situations that once confused you begin to make sense. And the direction that once felt unclear begins to reveal itself. Not all at once, but step by step. In a way that feels natural instead of forced. Now here is something very important that you need to hold on to as you move forward. Do not go back to who you used to be just because it feels familiar. Do not lower your awareness just to reconnect with environments that no longer align with you. And do not doubt yourself just because others don't fully understand what you've become. Because what you've developed is real, and it is stable, and it is going to shape everything that comes next. There will be moments where you are tested again, not in the same way as before, but in new ways that require you to apply what you've learned. These are not setbacks. They are confirmations. They are opportunities for you to operate from this new level consistently, not just occasionally, and the more consistently you operate from it, the more your life will reflect it. This is where alignment turns into momentum. This is where clarity turns into direction. And this is where everything that once felt delayed begins to move. You are stepping into a phase where things will start to connect faster, where decisions will feel clearer, and where the path in front of you will begin to open in ways that you don't have to force. But with that comes responsibility, because now you are aware of what you are doing. You are aware of how you process things, and you are aware of how your responses shape your reality. So every choice matters more, every decision carries more weight, and every direction you choose to move in will either align with what you've built or pull you away from it. That is why staying grounded in your awareness is so important. Not overthinking, not forcing, but staying present and clear. Because clarity is what got you here, and clarity is what will take you forward. Now let me say this clearly so there is no confusion. You are not behind, you are not lost, and you are not late. You are exactly where you need to be, at the moment where everything you've been through is starting to make sense. And from this point forward, your life is not about figuring out who you are anymore. It is about living as who you have already become. That is a completely different experience. It is quieter. It is more intentional, but it is also more powerful, because now you are not searching, you are moving. And that movement is going to take you into situations, opportunities, and connections that match your current level, not your past. Chosen one, if you felt this shift, if you've recognized yourself in what was said, then this message reached you exactly when it was supposed to. And I want you to do something simple. Not as something random, but as a marker. A way of acknowledging that you see the pattern now, that you understand what has been happening, and that you are stepping forward with awareness instead of confusion. And if you're ready to keep going deeper, to understand more about how to use what you've developed, and what is coming next, make sure you stay connected, because this is only the beginning. There is more that you are going to understand, and the more you understand, the more clearly you will see your path. And once you see it clearly, everything changes. Chosen one, you were never random. Your path was never random. And from this point forward, nothing about your life will feel random again.